Hello, welcome to this video. I am Sneha.G. I am in my first year of BA English Literature at Dr. SNS Rajalakshmi College of Arts and Science, and now I am going to give a presentation about the Renaissance. Renaissance. Renaissance literally means rebirth. The word is usually used with reference to the revival of learning of classical literature between the 14th and the 17th century. But it was more than just that. During this period, there developed a spirit of inquiry, a spirit of freedom of thought and action. Men were no longer willing to accept without question the teachings, superstitions, and customs of the past. There was a tendency to develop a critical attitude towards medieval institutions. Social, political, and religious ideas were all revolutionized. In short, a great change was taking place in men's attitude towards themselves and the world. It was as though a new life had begun. In the words of Professor Jebb, the Renaissance, in the largest sense of the term, is the process of transition in Europe from the medieval to modern order. The word Renaissance suggests different things to different people. To a student of social history, the word suggests the breaking up of the regime of feudalism and chivalry and the birth of new social conditions. To a student of religious evolution, it suggests the Reformation and Counter-Reformation. To the lover of art and literature, Renaissance, it means the recovery of the masterpieces of the ancient world and the revived knowledge of Greek and Latin. To a scientist, the word implies maritime exploration and the founding of astronomy, anatomy, physiology, and modern medicine. Hence, Walter Pater is right in calling the Renaissance a complex and many-sided movement. There were certain inventions and discoveries which contributed to the general movement of the Renaissance. Of these, the most important was the invention of printing press. The art of printing was introduced into Europe by John Gutenberg of Germany in 1454. The first Latin Bible was printed in 1455 at Mainz in Germany. The art of printing reached Italy in 1465, Switzerland in 1467, France in 1470, Austria and Netherlands in 1473, and Spain in 1474. The first printing press in England was established in 1476 by William Caxton at Westminster. All of these presses printed mostly Latin books, but books in English were printed for the first time only in 1483. The immediate effect was that books became cheaper and more plentiful. In the Middle Ages, the production of books was a slow process because they had to be produced by a copyist of the monasteries, and naturally enough knowledge was confined to the four walls of the monasteries. With the advent of the printing press, knowledge could now spread far and wide, which in turn fostered a questioning attitude. Another invention which gained popularity was the Mariner's compass. Before this invention, navigators could not venture far outside of land. After the compass came into use, the exploration of distant seas became possible. Along with this came also the invention of the telescope. Observers could now scan the sky. The use of the telescope by Galileo Galilei actually marks the beginning of the science of astronomy. The true position of the Earth in the solar system was realized, and the former teachings on this matter were discredited. After the capture of Constantinople by Turks in 1453, there was a regular exodus of Greek scholars into Europe. They were welcomed, and their presence stimulated a new enthusiasm for classical learning and culture among Italians, French, and English. Dante, Petrarch, and Boccaccio prepared the ground for the Renaissance in Italy. By 1396, the Greek language was taught in Italy by a Greek, Chrysolaus from Constantinople. After the fall of the eastern capital on May 29, 1453, most of the Greek scholars fled from there and, following the existing trade routes, came to Italy. Italian states were ruled by despots who competed with one another in the splendor of their courts. So they welcomed the Greek exiles to their capitals and posed as patrons of literature and art. From that time onwards, the study of language and literature and philosophy of Greece became the fashion of cultured classes in Italy. Another great Italian writer of the period was Machiavelli. In France, the effect of Renaissance was seen in the lyric poetry of Ronsard, the vigorous prose of Franco Rabelais, the scholarly essays of Montaigne. In Spain, the literary glory of the Renaissance was the glory of Cervantes. His Don Quixote, a burlesque of the romances of chivalry, is the most beautiful and wonderful gift of the Renaissance to the literature of the world. In England, the Renaissance was heralded by Geoffrey Chaucer and Schelling, who had contacts with Italy. But it was only some years later that classical scholarships had an earnest beginning in England. A good start was given by three Oxford friends. They are Thomas Linacre, William Grocyn, and Hugh Latimer. All of them studied in Italy and later lectured on Greek at Oxford University. After them, John Colet founded St. Paul's Grammar School, the first school in England completely devoted to the study of classical literature. The Latin grammar prepared by William Lilly, the first headmaster of the school, remained the standard textbook for 2 centuries. Other schools like Christ Hospital and the Charterhouse were started in England. Outside England, there was similar activity. In all, 63 new schools were founded in the reign of Henry VIII, 50 in that of Edward VI, 19 in that of Mary, and 138 in that of Elizabeth. The period of the Renaissance was also an age of translation. Virgil, Ovid, Cicero, Demosthenes, and Plutarch were all translated into English. The first part of Chapman's Homer appeared in 1598. These translations enabled even those who didn't know Greek and Latin to share the knowledge of classical literature. Thus, people like Shakespeare, who knew little Latin and less Greek, became familiar with classical mythology. The Renaissance in literature may be said to have begun in England with Sir Thomas More. His most famous work, Utopia, which is a Greek word meaning nowhere, was written in Latin and first published in 1516. The English translation was published in 1551. The contemporary and friend of More was Erasmus, a Dutchman by birth but settled in England. He was one of the last European writers who wrote in Latin. His most famous work was The Price of Folly. Spenser, the author of the first great English epic, Faerie Queene, is the representative poet of the English Renaissance. However, the genius of Renaissance in England found its fullest expression in the romantic drama, a good bulk of which was written by Shakespeare. Other memorable names of the Renaissance period are Ben Jonson, Francis Bacon, and Christopher Marlowe, who was also known as the father of English tragedy. During this period of Renaissance, educational ideals underwent great changes. In the Middle Ages, there were two schemes of education, one devised for the clergy, and the other to make a perfect and gentle knight. This system was not adequate enough to meet the demands of the modern age, so a new educational system had to be devised. Chief among those who conducted educational experiments were Comenius, Rabelais, and Montaigne. The purpose of education as conceived by them was to fashion not the scholar but the man to bring out all the faculties in harmonious and well balanced development, to prepare for life in the widest sense of the term. With the capture of Constantinople by the Turks, it became necessary for the European nations to find new trade routes to the east. The invention of Mariner's compass gave them courage to undertake maritime explorations. Thus, Columbus discovered the continent of America in 1492. Vasco da Gama reached Calicut on the west coast of India through the Cape of Good Hope in 1498. Magellan set out on his exploration of the Pacific Ocean in 1519. In 1521, he reached the Philippines, where unfortunately he was killed. His lieutenant Sebastian Delcano returned to Spain in 1522, having completed one of the great tests of history, the first circumnavigation of the world. All through the Middle Ages, the world at large had accepted the cosmology taught by Ptolemy of Egypt, according to which the earth was the center of the universe. Towards the middle of the 16th century, Copernicus of Holland discovered that the sun was the center of the universe. Kepler and Galileo, following his steps, revealed the solar system in its main features as we know it today. The Renaissance in religion consists of two movements, the Reformation and Counter-Reformation. The Reformation started in Germany. Martin Luther, the leader of the movement, translated the Old and New Testaments into German. William Tyndale gave an English rendering of the translation made by Erasmus. These translations of the Bible helped people to read and interpret the text for themselves. Then there started a Counter-Reformation and the founding of the Society of Jesus by Ignatius of Loyola in 1540. As an outcome of this Renaissance in religion, there was a split in the church, and those who protest against the supremacy of the Pope came to be known as Protestants. The Renaissance in art and literature. The names closely associated with the Renaissance in art and literature are those of Michelangelo, Raphael, and Leonardo da Vinci. They were all-rounders, poets, painters, and sculptors. Their works are the glory of the picture galleries in Europe. As sculptor, Michelangelo's most famous works are the statues of David and Moses and the Pieta. As a painter, he painted the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel and the great fresco of the Last Judgment on the walls of the same chapel. As a poet, Michelangelo wrote many sonnets and love poems. In his short life, Raphael painted a number of magnificent pictures, the majority of them being the Madonnas. Leonardo da Vinci is famous for the fresco of the Last Supper in the refectory of the Maria delle Grazie in Milan. The Renaissance in architecture. Like the other branches, the architecture also underwent a classical revival which spread the whole of Europe. Roman and Greek styles with columns and round arches and domes replaced the medieval Gothic style with its pointed arches, soaring pinnacles, and spires. St. Peter's Basilica in Rome is the greatest example of the new style. This style reached England in the 17th century through the works of Inigo Jones and Christopher Wren, whose greatest work was the reconstruction of St. Paul's Cathedral in London after the Great Fire of 1666. Wren also built 52 other churches in the city.